Jeffrey Epstein. For what, 2 decades now, his name has been tied to this sprawling web of money, power, and absolutely horrific abuse. Now, a massive release of documents is peeling back the curtain like never before. But what did these files really tell us? We're going to break it down and see what's actually inside.
So, first things first, what exactly are these so-called Epstein files? Well, think of it as this enormous data dump from the U.S. Justice Department. We're talking about decades worth of investigations into Jeffrey Epstein, his partner Ghislaine Maxwell, and their entire network. Honestly, this is our most detailed look yet inside one of the most disturbing scandals of our lifetime.
And the scale of this, it's just mind-boggling. We are talking about more than 3 million pages of documents, 2,000 videos, over 180,000 images. This isn't just a file, It's a whole archive of a criminal enterprise. So how in the world do we even start to make sense of all of it? Okay, to make sense of this mountain of information, we've broken this down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look back at that secret deal in Florida that kind of let Epstein off the hook for years. Then we'll map out the network of abuse he built. We'll see how the case got brought back to life, how the fight for transparency finally paid off, and then, at the very end, and this is super important, we'll separate the hard facts from all the wild theories floating around out there.
All right, let's start at the very beginning, that secret deal in Florida. This is the moment that really set the stage for everything that came after. It created this pattern of delayed justice that would end up lasting for more than a decade. So let's just walk through how this all went down. It kicks off in March of 2005. The Palm Beach police start looking into Epstein after a family of a 14-year-old girl files a report. But fast forward to July 2006, and Epstein gets arrested on this surprisingly minor state charge. And the police? They are just furious. They feel like he's getting special treatment. All the while, federal prosecutors are building this massive case against him. But by June of 2008, Epstein's high-powered lawyers have worked out this deal. He pleads guilty to lesser state charges, gets just 18 months, and get this, he even gets work release privileges, meaning he can leave jail during the day. It's a deal that, to this day, just doesn't sit right with anyone.
And here's the craziest part. It was a secret arrangement with the U.S. Attorney's Office down in Miami. A non-prosecution agreement, they called it. What that really meant was that the huge federal case against him and his co-conspirators, it just vanished. This deal was a masterclass in how wealth and influence could seemingly bend the justice system. And it's the very deal that Epstein's victims would spend the next 10 years fighting to overturn. So that deal, it basically allowed Epstein's network to keep operating for years. Let's take a closer look at the key people and the specific places that made this whole criminal enterprise tick. And at the absolute center of that network was Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite, Epstein's longtime partner, but she was so much more than just a confidant. As court records and her own conviction later proved, she was the primary facilitator of his abuse. The ringleader, really. So what did she actually do? Well, the court testimony is chilling. She was the one who went out and found vulnerable young women and girls. She would lure them in with these grand promises of a better life, maybe an education, a career. She'd groom them, building their trust while manipulating them the entire time. She was the one booking the flights, arranging trips to Epstein's properties all over the globe. And in the most disturbing detail of all, victims testified that she was often right there in the room when the abuse was happening. She wasn't just an accomplice, she was a core part of the machine. And while this abuse happened in a lot of places, New York, Florida, New Mexico, the network had a central hub, an absolute epicenter. And that was a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. This island, Little St. James, was bought by Epstein way back in 1998. It became his main home, but it quickly got a much, much darker reputation. People started calling it Epstein Island, or the Island of Sin, and according to court documents and the victims themselves, it was a place where just unspeakable crimes happened, a private paradise designed specifically to hide the darkest secrets from the outside world. But, secrets like this, they don't stay buried forever. More than a decade after that Florida deal, a new wave of investigations and some really incredible journalism just blew the case wide open again. This was the beginning of the end for Epstein and his network. And then, suddenly, it was like everything happened at once. July 6, 2019, Epstein is arrested in New York on brand new federal sex trafficking charges. Just about a month later, he's found dead in his jail cell. The next year, the FBI finally catches up with Ghislaine Maxwell. She's put on trial, a jury finds her guilty of sex trafficking, and in June of 2022, she's sentenced to 20 years behind bars.
It was this whirlwind of events that finally brought some measure of justice for the victims.
Maxwell's conviction was huge, for sure, but it also opened up this whole new can of worms. People started asking, okay, but what else is being hidden here? And that question led to this massive public push for transparency, a fight to get the government to finally release all of its files on the case.
So, how did these files actually see the light of day? Well, it was a combination of things, really. First, you had years and years of sustained pressure from journalists and from the victims themselves, who just refused to let this story die. That led to a really rare moment of unity in Congress, with Democrats and Republicans actually coming together to pass something called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And then the final piece of the puzzle was a judge's order that basically said, all right, enough is enough, it's time to open up the files. And this right here, this is it. This is the actual court order that changed everything. Signed by a U.S. district judge, this single piece of paper is what unlocked the archives and forced the Justice Department to make them public. This document is the reason we're even able to have this conversation right now.
So, the files are out. But now we get to what is maybe the most important part of this whole explainer. What do they actually mean? This is so crucial because with millions of documents comes this huge wave of misinformation. So we're going to separate the hard, verified facts from the persistent fiction.
Let's tackle the biggest myth right out of the gate. The idea that every single person named in these files is guilty of a crime. That is just flat out not true. Look, just because someone's name shows up in a flight log or an old address book doesn't mean they did anything wrong. A lot of these people were connected to Epstein for totally normal reasons. Business, charity work, you name it. The only people who are guilty are the ones who have been convicted in a court of law.
And then, of course, there's the big question of Epstein's death. It's totally understandable why there are so many conspiracy theories swirling around. I mean, the guy was connected to so many powerful people, and the timing was incredibly suspicious. But here's the fact. The official ruling from the medical examiner is suicide. All the other theories, no matter how compelling they might sound, are just that, theories. There's just no verified, forensic evidence to back them up.
So after all of this, what should you really take away? Let's just boil it down. 1. Verified court documents prove this was a systematic, organized network of abuse. 2. Ghislaine Maxwell was a central and convicted facilitator in that network. 3. And this is so important, being named in the files does not automatically mean someone is guilty. 4. This release has absolutely fueled demands for accountability for powerful people. And finally, number 5, the only way to really understand this story is to stick to primary court documents and corroborated testimony. That's where the truth is.
So, where do we go from here? The files are open, the secrets are out in the open, but the biggest question of all is still hanging in the air. Will all this transparency finally lead to real, true accountability for everyone involved? That right there is the question that defines this entire story.